Gambit Part 1. We finally get the X-Men crossover episode we've been waiting for. Outside of that other one with Jean Grey.
Troy talks to an alien bartender who keeps hitting on her about finding someone who owes her money. The bartender is played by Stephen Lee, who we saw before in The Vengeance Factor. And I was hoping I'd never be able to say that sentence.
From his description, it turns out Troy is looking for Picard, and the bartender tries to make some moves on her, but then he finds out she's a Betazoid, which changes his mind.
And even though Troy can sense that he's lying about not knowing anything, he says he owes it to his patrons to remain silent.
We cut over to Riker and get a dumb end-of-conversation line as he's mingling with other bar patrons.
I'll remember it next time I'm in a knife fight.
And Worf points out someone who seems to know more.
The alien, Wrinkles, that's what I called him, has information but he expects payment, but as they're discussing the matter, the bartender interjects and warns Wrinkles not to say anything.
Then Beverly intervenes via phaser, and with people threatening him on all sides, Wrinkles says that he'll talk if they agree to drop him off on some other planet.
He tells them that Picard was there a few weeks ago with some dangerous aliens.
He says they attacked Picard, but he managed to incapacitate 3 of them before they took him out. Picard must have had a strong hand to be able to take him out like that.
Beverly scans a wall and finds traces of DNA, and Wrinkles reveals that during the fight, Picard was vaporized, and Troy confirms he's telling the truth. Based on the opening interactions, it was clear the officers didn't want to reveal that they were part of Starfleet, but once they started questioning Wrinkles, they start openly doing and saying things that clearly identify them as Starfleet. I would imagine, based on the bartender's reaction, that others in the bar would not be happy about what the officers were doing, but nobody seems to care.
Yeah, I was surprised they showed their hands so quickly.
And at this point, I knew Riker was going to go nuts, since that's what he did before.
Riker gives us an acting captain's log where he says that Crusher positively identified Picard's DNA and there is no doubt that he's dead. And Troy visits him to say he should give the eulogy at the memorial, but Riker says he won't be at the service.
I don't want it to get better, and I don't want to pretend that everything's all right.
And he says he'll do whatever it takes to find who is responsible. He's going all in.
Troy tells him he's not the only one who's hurting, and that he owes it to the crew to show a sense of responsibility.
He apologizes for being selfish, before repeating that he's going to do whatever it takes to find out who is responsible. So it wasn't really an apology at all.
In the ready room, Riker receives a message from an admiral. Riker tells him he doesn't trust the authorities on the planet to investigate Picard's death.
And the admiral questions if Riker should really be the one to investigate, but eventually approves his psychotic vendetta of revenge, really without any pushback, and tells him he can do whatever he wants.
Riker talks to Wrinkles and asks him if he remembered anything else relevant, but Wrinkles says the killers said they would kill anyone who talked about it.
He says he could probably give some information if he had a shuttlecraft, but Riker calls his bluff and says he'll give him to the Klingons for all of his outstanding warrants if he doesn't fold.
And Wrinkles finally tells Riker that the aliens were mercenaries and that he thinks they were heading to the Barada system. And I'm not surprised that Riker could see past his shitty poker face.
Later at a meeting, Data says they picked up signals from one of the planets in the Barada system, and that there are a bunch of archaeological ruins on the surface.
Riker says he wants to go down, and when the others leave, Data confronts him and says that if Picard were there, Riker would tell him that the captain's place is on the bridge. But Riker says not this time.
On the surface of the planet, Geordi, with his leg up, tells Riker with his leg up that he's having trouble detecting things because of unknown interference.
Because this is an episode of Star Trek The Next Generation. They find what looks like a battle site, but Riker says the shape of the blasted out areas is too perfect.
Geordi says he found readings that match what Beverly found earlier in the bar at the site of Picard's death.
Worf finds some broken artifacts, but before they can examine them, a couple of aliens start shooting lasers at them, and the expendable crewman gets zapped.
Their communications are subsequently jammed, and Data is unable to beam them back up. The battle continues, and I'm glad I was able to tell whose lasers were whose with that convenient color coding. Page right out of the Star Wars playbook.
And Riker ends up getting knocked out by an exploding rock or something.
I noticed that the only person who directly got hit on either side was the expendable crewman, but they just abandoned his ass. They didn't even try and go back for him during the fight. I guess they just assumed he was dead. That dude really got a bad hand.
Then the aliens run over to Riker and beam out with him.
The Enterprise detects a ship approaching, which opens fire as it flees. Data tells them to pursue, but the fleeing ship has sensor avoidance measures, so the Enterprise loses it.
They fly back and pick up the away team and have a meeting where Data tells them that a ship of that design has been linked to multiple attacks in the area, and it appears to be coated in an energy-absorbing material that makes it undetectable by long-range sensors.
Geordi says he'll just increase the sensitivity of the sensors, but isn't that what they did back in that 2D episode that caused all of those problems? Data must have realized this, so he comes up with a BS explanation of why that won't work.
But Worf says they can't just sit there and let the aliens run the table, but Data says they must. It was a weird moment.
And Worf reacting angrily to them taking Riker, apparently lashing out in angry revenge mode, only works when Riker does it, because the rest of them looked at him like he was crazy, just shut his ass down. Data says they'll go down to the surface and try and find more clues, then sits there and contemplates if it's even worth going after them, because he's the captain now.
We cut to the Mercenary ship,
which turns out to be run by an 80s hair metal band.
captained by Arctus Baran, who is played by Richard Lynch, who's in a crap ton of genre stuff. Baran questions Riker, who says they were there to examine the ruins. But Baran says there's nothing to learn there, and when Riker asks what they were doing there, Baran activates a pain device, similar to what David Warner used on Picard. The others criticize Baran and tell him he should get rid of Riker, but Baran says a Starfleet commander is a valuable hostage, and he shows that he can use that device on any of his crew.
And unexpectedly, Picard swivels around in a chair with his cheap-as-hell looking cosplay belts and says they should kill Riker.
Baran addresses him as Galen.
And Picard conjures a fake history for Riker, saying he has a history of insubordination, citing specific missions and incidents, which wasn't suspect at all. It's like he went to his Wikipedia page.
The ship suddenly unexpectedly starts shooting through space, and the engineer says it could be caused by any number of engine problems. Picard signals to Riker, and Riker offers to fix the issue, saying he has experience. And when he gives orders, Baran orders the others to follow them. So Riker fixes things, and having shown his value, Baran orders him taken to quarters, instead of executed.
Back on the planet, Worf, Data, and Geordi are still trying to figure out what is of interest in the ruins. And I guess Data decided not to follow his own advice, since he's now in command of the ship, but is part of the away team.
I guess he decided that round was too good to sit out. Data suggests Romulans could be involved, because the race that lived there before was related to the Romulans, and the ruins on the planet that Picard was on were also Romulan.
I like how he waited until now to reveal that, when it would have been very nice to know earlier. Worf points out that a Romulan was with the mercenary party, and assumes they were the leader.
On the Enterprise, they look up other nearby areas with similar ruins, and find out the next likely planet they would head to is Calder 2, which has a Federation science station that would be defenseless if the mercenary ship attacks.
Back on the mercenary ship, Picard reveals to Riker that his supposed death was due to basically a transporter gun, which sounded super useful. Too bad that will never come up again after this episode is resolved.
At the same time, though, if you miss with it and you accidentally transport like a giant tree or something up to your ship, that could cause problems.
That would be really funny. And how do they determine where things transport to?
Yeah, that's what I was going to say, is if you could program it to transport things over the enemy or something, you could just keep shooting rocks and dropping them onto whoever you're fighting. Picard talks about how he lied about his identity and got taken in by the mercenaries, and he says they are stealing Romulan artifacts in search of a specific one, but he doesn't know why.
He says if he and Riker can be at odds with each other, it'll help Riker get closer to Baran, and then he smacks him as Baran enters,
saying he was trying to get answers out of Riker. But Baran activates the pain device and tells him to get out. On the mercenary bridge, Baran says they're going to Calder 2. Picard says it's defended by Starfleet, claiming that he tried to steal something from there before and nearly lost all his chips.
Baran says it's not a big deal, and they can easily destroy the Federation outpost, when Picard suggests using Riker to talk his way through so they can avoid a battle.
He says they should be able to get them to lower their shields and beam up the artifacts, and Riker will go along with it because he wouldn't want them to destroy the base.
Baran agrees, but preps their weapons anyway, just in case it doesn't work.
Picard scans some artifacts. The Romulan Talera comes in to tell him that Baran is getting impatient with how long it's taking. but Picard says if he wants it done right, he'll let him continue as he has been doing.
Talera is played by Robin Curtis, who played Savick in Star Trek 3 and 4.
Picard says he doesn't like not knowing what they're looking for. Talera says she knows everything Baran knows, but she's not about to show Picard her hand.
Picard says if someone challenged Baran, the rest of the crew would follow, and Talera says she can tolerate Picard, but if he gets in her way, she'll kill him herself.
Riker talks to the Starfleet base on Calder 2, saying he wants to station men on the planet for their protection, but they say no because that doesn't follow regulation.
Baran gets tired of them stalling, and he prepares to fire, but Picard does a dramatic no, so he must have watched Descent Part 2 when Hugh did that.
Well, he was there, but...
No, he watched it later.
Okay.
And he disables the outpost shields.
Talera manages to beam up some artifacts, but the shields go back up before they can get all of them. But Baran's after the whole pot, so he orders the outpost destroyed. But they're suddenly attacked by the Enterprise. But if the artifacts are in the outpost, and they destroy the outpost, wouldn't that destroy the artifacts?
Baran puts Riker on the view screen, who tells Data to withdraw before abruptly ending communication. Riker tells Baran he can remotely shut down the Enterprise's shields
by transmitting his access codes.
And when he tries, Worf detects it.
When the Enterprise picks up the codes, Troi says Riker should know that they would have been changed as soon as he was captured. Worf is confused, but Data is able to read Riker's tell.
Prepare to drop shields.
Once the Enterprise's shields are down, Baran orders them to open fire. And when they do, the Enterprise is completely... Gambit, Part 1. Overall?
Seeing Picard and Riker pretend to be other people, and even the other characters at the beginning in the bar pretending to be other people, was fun, but this episode asked for the viewers to look past a lot of very implausible things. Picard being accepted into the Mercenary crew, then Riker being accepted were obviously the big ones, and I didn't think it handled those very convincingly. It very much felt like a TV show thing. Seeing the crew deal with Picard's supposed death was good, but we didn't get much of anyone's reactions other than Riker and a little Troi, and then Worf kind of blowing up at that one instance. The search for a specific relic with some kind of hidden significance reminded me of The Chase, and I hope the revelation of what that's all about turns out to be something interesting, but I suspect that it won't. And then, of course, Riker and Picard's position reminded me of Troi in Face of the Enemy, and Richard Lynch's device reminded me of Chain of Command Part 2. For being the first of a two-parter, this episode didn't feel like it had a strong enough story or unique enough premise to warrant it. It felt like it was just kind of cobbling things together from earlier episodes. But I still thought it was okay on its own, and the second part could really push it in either direction. I gave it a C+.
I gave it a C-. My first question was why the other officers seemed completely in the dark about what Picard was doing at the beginning with his earlier activities. It makes it seem like he didn't tell any of them where he was going.
There have been a lot of episodes like that lately, though, which doesn't excuse it.
He wasn't doing anything out of line, he was just checking out ruins or artifacts, which he does all the time. Even something like, we haven't heard from him since he went to investigate those ruins he was talking about, would have been nice.
I think they did say something like that at some point. I mean, the episode does start out already in the investigation stage.
Maybe I missed it. This again was an episode that showed how absurdly attached Riker is to Picard and how he'll completely abandon his duty, responsibilities, and sanity for it. And it was weird how everyone just let him do whatever he wanted. The Admiral, Data, Troi, they'd question his actions and tell him why it wasn't a good course of action, but then cave immediately when his only justification was, I want to. And the Enterprise was on a mission before they went looking for Picard, and the Admiral told them it was cool to abandon that mission, and I assume he got someone else to cover, but he didn't seem fazed by any of it or upset. So a ship can pretty much just discard their missions at will? For all the Admiral or the crew know, they could be out searching for years before they find anything. And this is the flagship of the fleet. So Starfleet is about duty, honor, and responsibility. Until it's not, and becomes about flying a highly armed spaceship wherever you want on missions of revenge, missions of justice. Data not revealing everything he had put together about the ruins being tied to the Romulans was lazy writing and held back just long enough so it could forward the plot at the appropriate moment. I'm surprised neither Geordi nor Worf called him out on it.
But that's when the writers thought of it.
Yeah. For being a two-part episode, I'm not that engaged to find out what happens, really just the Romulan angle. I hope Picard and Riker will play it straight and flush out whatever their plot is. But that's about it. If I were them, I would cash out and just leave.
You two make enough noise to wake the half-dead.